If you are one of those people who
What
think
is this place?
supernatural places only exist in old
This can't be
folktales,
real.
then I don't
I
blame
almost
you.
made it.
I
Don't
used to
look
laugh
back.
at stories like that too. When I first heard rumors about a market hidden somewhere in the forest of northern Nigeria, I did not believe it at first. People claimed it only appeared once every year, and that if you are willing to pay the price, you could walk away with anything you wanted in this life. I thought it was one of those old village stories people invented to keep children away from the forest, until I found the marketplace myself. My name is Tosin, and 3 weeks earlier, nobody was talking about mysterious markets or forests. My biggest concern back then was finding a story worthy of my name. At the time, I was working as an investigative journalist in Lagos. I wasn't the kind of reporter who sat behind a desk writing press releases. If there was a rumor everyone avoided, I wanted to know why. If powerful people were hiding something, I wanted to be the first person to uncover it. Over the years, that attitude earned me a reputation. I had exposed several corrupt politicians, investigated financial scams, and exposed a criminal network that operated across different states. My work won me plenty of national awards and recognition. From the outside, it looked like I had everything I had ever wanted, but the truth was much more complicated. Home was much different. My apartment was quiet in a way I had grown used to. There was no wife to greet me when I returned from the office, and no children running around the living room, just shelves filled with books, camera equipment, and unfinished notebooks from investigations that had consumed months of my life. Work had quietly become my entire personality, and I think I knew why. There was something from my past that I never really dealt with. I lost my father 5 years ago. My father and
It
I
is my
had
life,
argued
Dad, not
only a few
yours.
days before he
You are
died.
chasing
We
shadows.
never agreed
I am
on
making
many
a difference.
things,
Why can you not
and we
see
never
that?
really
You have never
connected.
listened to anyone
Both of
but
us
yourself.
believed that there would be another day to finish the conversation, but there wasn't. The phone call telling me that he had died came before either of us had the chance to apologize. For a long time, I blamed myself. People always say time heals everything. I don't think that's true. Sometimes, time doesn't remove the pain. It only teaches you how to carry it without letting anyone see. My work was what helped me stop thinking about it. It gave me an excuse to stay busy instead of sitting with my guilt. As long as I was exposing someone else's secrets, I didn't have to face my own regrets. At least, that was what I told myself. I had no idea that my next investigation was about to lead me somewhere that would change my life forever. You see, success has a strange way of changing your appetite. I was no longer excited by small wins. I wanted to do more. Every investigation now had to be bigger than the last one. I started looking for a breakout story that would stand above everything else I had ever done. One story people will still be talking about years after I had retired. That search slowly became an obsession. Looking back now, I don't think I found the market by accident. I think it had been waiting for someone exactly like me, because places like that don't reveal themselves to people who are simply curious. They wait for people who are obsessed enough to ignore every warning. It all started one night after I had returned from the office. I started researching online for stories in places most people would never think to search. That was how I found a rumor that caught my attention. It started with an old post from an online forum about a market somewhere in northern Nigeria that appeared once every year. The details were too specific to ignore. It claimed that there were things you could get there that money cannot buy. That is granted anything a person wanted, no matter how impossible it seemed. Nobody could agree on what exactly the market really offered. They only agreed that anyone who could pay the price never left empty-handed. I spent the next few hours going through forgotten blogs, old newspaper archives, and online records relating to the market. Some people claimed it was somewhere near a forest. Others said it appeared close to an abandoned road. It was almost as if everyone who came close to the truth avoided writing the full story down. As an investigative journalist, those were the details that interested me the most because people don't hide ordinary things. I started contacting people connected to some of the reports. Most ignored my messages. Someone actually responded but refused to give me details. But that did not stop me. So I kept digging and eventually found a newspaper article that helped. It mentioned a group of travelers who had arrived in a remote village asking about a market that supposedly appeared every year. The article was written more than 15 years ago. At the bottom of the page was the date it was published, and that date was exactly the same time of the year as the other reports. I checked the calendar,
Finally, after all this
and the next
searching, I
appearance of
found
the
it.
market was
This could
only
be
a
the
couple
biggest
of
story
days
of my
away.
career.
Then I told myself this was it. I found my story. Immediately, I booked a flight to northern Nigeria the following morning. I was going there to investigate the mystery. If the market was real, it would be the biggest story of my career because I would be the first journalist to uncover it. The flight landed the following afternoon. From there, I hired a taxi that took me as far
You're
north
really
as the
going
paved
all the way
roads
there?
would allow.
There's nothing in
The
that
driver
village.
complained the entire journey
I've taken people
about
to many
where I said I
places,
was
but
going.
never there.
He kept
What
asking
exactly are
why
you looking
anyone
for
from
in that
Lagos
village?
would travel
Why
that
would
far
anyone
just
leave
to
Lagos
visit
for
a
a place
forgotten
people have
village that
forgotten?
had nothing to offer. I simply told him I was following a story. Hours later, the buildings became fewer and the busy roads gave way to dusty paths. Eventually, the taxi could not go any further. The driver dropped me beside a narrow road and pointed toward a small settlement in the distance. That's the village, he said. You'll have to walk from here. I picked up my backpack, my camera, and my notebook, then continued on foot. The village was smaller than I expected. A handful of mud houses stood beneath old trees, with children playing nearby, while a few women prepared their evening meals outside their homes. Chickens wandered freely across the paths. Apart from the sound of goats and distant conversations, the place was peaceful. It looked like the kind of village where nothing unusual had ever happened. For a moment, I wondered if I had wasted my time. I decided to start with the
Good
simplest
evening. My
approach.
name is
I
Tosin.
greeted a
I'm a
few people
journalist from
and
Lagos.
introduced myself as a journalist. At first, they
You're
welcomed me
welcome, our
politely,
son. What
then
brings you here?
answered ordinary questions about the village, farming, and the dry seasons without any hesitation. But when I mentioned the market, I noticed their expressions changed. The elderly man I had been speaking to stopped smiling. He looked at me for a few seconds without saying a word before quietly standing up and walking into his house. The wooden door closed behind him. I stood there confused. Maybe he didn't hear me properly. I approached another group sitting beneath a tree. The moment I asked if they knew anything about a market that appeared once every year, the conversation
Excuse
ended
me, can you
immediately.
tell me what
Nobody
happened
answered.
here?
One by one, they got up and walked away, as if I wasn't even standing there. A strange feeling settled inside me. It wasn't that they didn't know what I was talking about. They knew, but it was the way they refused to acknowledge it. Over the next hour, the same thing happened again and again. The people I talked to looked genuinely frightened. By now, I wasn't just curious. I was convinced that the mystery market was real because people don't react like that to ordinary rumors. Eventually, one
You've asked
middle-aged
enough
man
questions.
spoke to me with a
Leave before
stern voice.
nightfall.
You should leave immediately before nightfall. If anything, that warning only strengthened my resolve. Every investigation I had ever completed started with someone telling me to stop asking questions. I was not about to stop now. The sun was already beginning to sink when I noticed
Good
an
evening,
elderly
Elder.
man sitting alone
Welcome, young
beneath a
man.
large tree at the edge of the village. Unlike everyone else, he didn't try to avoid me. An old hunting rifle rested across his lap, and beside him lay a worn leather bag that looked older than I was. His face carried the quiet patience of someone who had spent most of his life in the forest. When I greeted him, he nodded, and before I could even ask my questions, he spoke.
I understand
You
you're
are looking
looking
for
for
the
the
market.
market.
I slowly nodded. The old hunter stepped towards the forest, beyond the village, for a long moment before raising one hand to point beyond the last dirt road, far beyond the trees. Keep walking
Keep
until
walking
there are
until
no
there
more
are no
paths,
more
he
paths.
said quietly.
After that,
And
follow
after
the
that,
lanterns.
follow the lanterns. I found the
Lanterns?
lanterns.
What
He
lanterns?
didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked directly into my eyes with an expression I still remember to this day. It wasn't fear, it was pity. Then he spoke one final sentence. The market opens
The market
tonight.
opens tonight.
The old hunter refused to say anything else. I waited, hoping he would explain what he meant, but he simply looked away. The conversation was over. I thanked him and walked back towards the center of the village. By then, the sun had almost disappeared behind the hills. The few people still outside were hurrying home. Before long, the entire village became unusually quiet. It didn't feel normal. There were no children playing outside anymore, no laughter or evening conversations. It was as if everyone was waiting for something. I checked the time on my phone, just after 8. For almost an hour, nothing happened. I started wondering if I had misunderstood the old hunter. Maybe he had only wanted me to leave the village before dark. Then I saw the first lantern. A wooden door opened quietly, and an old woman stepped outside holding a small lantern. She looked around carefully before walking towards the edge of the village. A few minutes later, another door opened, then another. One after another, people began leaving their homes. Nobody spoke or greeted each other. They simply walked. Each person carried a lantern, and each of them moved in the same direction, towards the forest. My heart started beating faster. This was what the hunter meant. I stayed behind until the last group had gone ahead before quietly following them. I kept my distance. The last thing I wanted was for anyone to realize they were being followed. The narrow paths soon disappeared beneath thick trees. From where I stood, they looked like small stars floating between the trees. The air felt different. The sounds of insects slowly faded until all I could hear were footsteps and the soft crackling of lantern flames. I expected the forest to grow darker. Instead, it became brighter. At first, I thought the lanterns were simply getting closer. Then I realized the light wasn't coming from them anymore. A warm golden glow was spreading through the trees ahead. Then I saw it. At first, it looked like a few wooden stalls standing among the trees. But as we moved closer, more appeared. Within a
What
few
is this
moments,
place?
an entire marketplace
This
stood in
can't
the
be
middle of
real.
the forest. People walked between the stalls as though they had been coming there all their lives. If someone had dropped me there without a warning, I would have believed it was an ordinary village market. Everything looked normal. Traders called customers closer with a smile. Lanterns hung above wooden tables, and voices filled the air. Nothing about it looked supernatural. People moved from one trader to another, speaking quietly as they bargained. If I had stopped looking there, I probably would have concluded that the rumors I heard about this place were just exaggerated village stories. But I had not traveled all this way from Lagos to look from a distance. I came to investigate. So I reached into my bag and brought out my camera. Since the market was real, I needed proof. I started taking pictures, but when I checked the screen, every photograph was completely black. Not blurry, but black. I frowned and looked back at the market. Everything was still there. I checked the camera setting and everything was normal. I took another picture and it was the same result, a black image. For a moment, I wondered if the camera had suddenly developed a fault. So I turned away from the market and took a picture of the trees behind me, and the photograph came out completely perfect. I pointed the camera back towards the market. It was black again. A cold feeling ran through my blood. I had never seen anything like it. Slowly, I put the camera away and pulled out my notebook instead. If I couldn't photograph what I was seeing, I would write everything down. After all, that was how I handled investigations long before the digital cameras came around. I began moving through the market carefully, pretending to be another visitor, while quietly writing everything I noticed. The longer I watched, the stranger the place became. Nobody carried wallets, nobody counted cash. I didn't see a single person pay with money. Instead, every customer leaned close to a trader and whispered something I couldn't hear. The trader would listen without interrupting. Then they would open a large ledger resting on the table and write something inside. The customer nodded. The trader nodded back. And just like that, the trade was completed. Money didn't change hands. There were no signatures. Yet, customers walked away looking satisfied. I moved from store to store, hoping to understand what was happening. And the same thing repeated everywhere. A whisper, a ledger, and a nod. Then the customer left. It made no sense. I tried standing closer to overhear the conversation, but every trader spoke so softly that I could barely catch a single word. It was almost as if the market itself refused to let anyone hear another person's bargain. One thing, however, caught my attention. Every ledger looked old, very old. The pages had turned yellow with age. Some were held together with worn leather covers that looked older than the traders themselves. Yet, each trader gathered theirs carefully. Nobody left a ledger unattended. That only made me more curious. As an investigative journalist, I had learned that people protect what matters most. And in that market, nothing seemed more important than those books. At that moment, I should have left before someone noticed me asking too many questions. But like I said before, curiosity has a way of making intelligent people do foolish things. I waited until one elderly trader stepped away from his stall to speak with another customer nearby. His ledger remained open on the wooden table. I walked over and glanced inside quickly, and it wasn't an ordinary list of transactions. There were names, and beside each name were items that made no sense. 10 years, a firstborn, a voice, peace. None of it looked like anything people normally traded in a market. I stayed at the page, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I looked around, and nobody seemed to be watching. And before I could talk myself out of it, I tore a single page from the ledger, folded it quickly, and slipped it inside my notebook. My heart started pounding immediately. I turned and started walking towards the edge of the market, trying not to attract attention. I had barely taken a few steps when I heard a calm voice call my name behind me.
Tosin.
Tosin. I stopped walking. Every part of my body froze. Very slowly, I turned around. The elderly trader was standing exactly where I had left him. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was simply smiling at me. Then he said something that made my blood run cold.
I have been
I have been expecting you. I couldn't speak. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Had someone from the village told him my name? Or maybe he had seen my press card. The trader smiled as if he could hear the questions inside my head. He looked nothing like the terrifying figure I expected to find in a place like that. He was an old man, dressed in simple clothes. If I had met him on an ordinary day, I would have assumed he sold yams, vegetables, or something like that. You have come a long way, he said calmly. I still couldn't answer. The old man didn't seem bothered by my silence. He simply stood there, watching me with the kind of patience that made me even more uncomfortable. Before either of us could say another word, someone hurried towards the store. It was a woman carrying a little boy in her arms. The child looked no older than 7 years. His head rested weakly against her shoulder, and his breathing sounded slow and heavy. His mother looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. She stopped in front of the trader and immediately fell to her knees. The old man gently raised his hand for her to stand. She leaned closer to him and whispered something into his ear. I couldn't hear a single word. The trader listened quietly before opening the ledger on the table. He wrote something in it. Then he looked up and said two words I could barely hear.
10 years.
10 years. That was all I had. The woman closed her eyes. After a brief moment, she nodded. The trader wrote something again in the ledger before closing it. Then, right before my eyes, the little boy coughed. His pale face slowly regained its color. His breathing became stronger. The boy opened his eyes, climbed down from his mother's arms, and stood on his feet. His mother burst into tears. Not tears of grief, but relief. She hugged him tightly before leading him away through the crowd. I stood there, trying to understand what had just happened. I spent my entire career exposing lies. I knew what fake looked like, but this wasn't fake. It was then that I understood the strange entries I saw in the ledger. Everything finally began to make sense. 10 years. That wasn't how long the boy would live. It was what his mother had just given away to save him. The other entries suddenly made sense to me too. A firstborn, a voice, peace. There weren't things people came to buy. They were the prices people agreed to pay for what they wanted. That was the moment I finally understood. Nothing in this market was bought with money. Everything was paid with life. Then the trader turned his attention back to me. The same calm
You
smile
have
was
spent
still on
many
his
years
face.
looking for answers.
You have spent many years
And
looking
yet,
for
there's
answers,
one
he
question
said.
you've never been able
And
to
yet,
answer.
there is one question you have never been able to answer. I looked at him carefully.
What
What question? He stared
The pain you
directly
buried.
into my eyes.
Whether your
Whether
father
your
knew you were
father knew
sorry.
you were sorry. My entire body went still. For a moment, the noise of the market disappeared. I had never mentioned my father to him. Not once. I did not discuss my past with anyone in the market. Yet, he spoke about the one thing I had spent years
Who told
trying
you
not
about
to
my
think about.
father?
How do you know about my father? I asked. The trader didn't answer me immediately. Instead, he looked around the market, at the people walking between the stalls, at the customers searching for things they couldn't find anywhere else. Then he looked back
People
at
come
me.
here because they want
People
something.
come here because they want
Some seek
something.
wealth.
He paused.
Some seek
Some
power.
want wealth.
Some seek
Some
what
want
they've
power.
lost.
Some want things they lost. His voice became softer.
But the
But
market
the
doesn't
market
only
does
give
not
people
only
what they
give
ask
people
for.
what they ask for.
It also
He
knows
stepped
what they are
closer.
truly searching for.
It knows what they are truly searching for. I did not know what to say. A part of me wanted to walk away, but another part of me remembered the little boy who had opened his eyes moments earlier, and the mother who walked away with her son.
What are you saying?
What are you saying? I asked. The trader looked at me. Then he said the words I never expected to hear. You can speak with
You
your
can
father
speak with your
again.
father again.
My heart stopped. For years, I had imagined what I would say if I ever got one more chance, one more conversation, one more moment. There were so many things I wanted to explain, so many things I wanted to apologize for, but I knew that was impossible. My father was gone, and nothing could change that. At least, that was what I believed before I entered the forest. That's
That's
not
not
possible,
possible.
I replied. The trader didn't argue. He simply looked at me.
Many things
Many
become
things
possible
become
when someone is
possible when
willing to pay
someone
the
is willing to
price.
pay the price. I already knew what he meant. I looked at the old book resting on his table. Then I looked back at him.
What will it
What
cost?
will it cost? The trader replied with a wide smile.
5 years.
5 years. Those words felt heavy as he said them.
5 years
5
of
years of
what?
what? He didn't blink.
5 years of
Your
your
life.
life.
I looked away. 5 years was not money. It wasn't something I could earn back. It was time. The one thing nobody ever gets enough of. I thought about all the years I had already wasted carrying guilt. All the nights I spent avoiding that memory. All the moments with my father I could never get back. Maybe 5 years was a lot. But compared to the weight I had carried since I lost my father, I wasn't sure anymore. The trader didn't pressure me. He didn't even try to convince me. He simply waited. And somehow, that made the decision even harder. Because he knew I would make the choice myself. After all my hesitation and attempts to think rationally, I agreed. Okay. The trader nodded with a smile. Slowly, he reached for the old ledger. He opened it to a blank page and dipped his pen in ink. For a moment, I wondered if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But before I could change my mind, he placed the pen on the page. I watched as he slowly wrote my name. The moment the ink touched the paper, everything around me changed. The sounds of the market started fading away. Then everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't standing in the market anymore. I was somewhere familiar, somewhere I hadn't been in years. My old family house. I looked around and everything was exactly how I remembered it. Then I heard a voice behind me.
Tosin,
Tosin. My heart stopped. I turned around and there he was, my father, standing right in front of me like he never left. I couldn't speak. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. For years, I had imagined this moment, and now it was actually happening. I just stood there staring at him. My father smiled slightly. You have grown. That was all it took. Everything I had buried for years came rushing back. The anger, the regret, the things I wished I had said. I walked toward him slowly. I am sorry. The words came out before I even realized I was saying them. My voice broke. I am so sorry. My father looked at me quietly. And at that moment, I wasn't the successful journalist who had won awards. I wasn't the person everyone respected. I was just his son. The son who wished he had one more chance. I should have listened to you, I said. I should have called more. I should have visited more. I should have spent more time with you instead of always thinking there would be another day. I looked down. I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. For years, I had carried those words like a punishment. I thought about them every time I remembered him. But my father only stepped closer. Tosin, I looked up. You are my son. His voice was so calm. Not a mistake or a disappointment. He paused. I knew you were trying to find your way. I felt tears forming in my eyes. I thought you were disappointed in me. My father shook his head. Never. The word hit me harder than I expected. Parents don't always know the right things to say. Children don't always know the right things to do. But that doesn't mean love disappears. For the first time in years, I felt relief. The conversation continued for what felt like hours. We talked about things we never had the chance to discuss. The arguments that separated us. The dreams I was afraid to chase. The things I wished I had told him before it was too late. Then slowly, the room began fading. I looked at my father. I already knew what was happening. No, I whispered. But he smiled. It is okay. I wanted to hold on. I wanted more time. But somehow, I knew this moment was enough. The last thing I heard was his voice. Live your life, Tosin. Then everything disappeared. I opened my eyes and I was back in the market. The lanterns, the sounds, the people, everything returned. The trader was standing in front of me, watching quietly.
payment
Payment
received.
received, he said. I looked at him. For the first time in years, my chest felt lighter. The guilt that had followed me everywhere was gone. The questions I never got answers to had finally been answered. I had spent years trying to escape the past, but all I really needed was one final conversation. For a moment, I almost forgot where I was. Then I felt the notebook in my hand and the camera hanging around my neck. And suddenly, I remembered something. A story without evidence is just a story. If I was going to prove this market existed, I needed proof. I needed photographs, records, something the world would believe. I looked around the market again. Then I quickly reached for my camera. And just like before, every picture came out completely blank. This place wasn't just hiding from the world, it was hiding itself. And suddenly, I understood why nobody had ever been able to prove it existed. Then I remembered the folded ledger page I had hidden inside my notebook. The one thing that could prove everything I had seen was real. It had names, transactions, and the impossible prices people paid to get what they wanted. At least, no one could dismiss this evidence. I held the notebook tightly against my chest. This was my proof. Now I just needed to leave. I turned toward the path leading back into the forest and started walking. Then, just before I reached the exit,
Leave
an
what
elderly
belongs to the
trader stepped
market.
into my path. Leave what belongs to the market. I looked at him confused. What does that mean?
Leave
He
what
only
belongs to
repeated
the
the same
market.
words. Leave what belongs to the market. I looked down at my notebook. My grip tightened. I took another step forward. A second trader appeared, then another, each one carrying the same calm expression. They all say the same thing.
Leave what belongs to
Leave
the
what belongs to
market.
the market. I looked at the notebook in my hand. The page inside was the only proof I had, and they wanted it back. Before I could decide what to do, a loud bell echoed through the market. Every trader turned toward the direction of the sound. I felt a strange feeling in my chest. I had heard about this before. During my research, there was a warning about what happened before the market closed. The bell sounded 3 times, and after the third sound, nobody left, because whoever remained inside the market became part of next year's traders. The calm market I had been standing in suddenly felt like a place filled with urgency. People who had been walking slowly between the stores started moving faster. The traders remained calm. They simply watched as the market was preparing to close. I held my notebook tightly and followed the crowd, but the traders kept blocking my path. Then the second bell sounded. I looked back and noticed something that made me stop. Some customers were no longer trying to leave. They were standing beside empty stores. I looked closer and noticed that the traders who had been standing there earlier were gone. The customers had taken their place. My stomach tightened. They were no longer customers, but had become part of the market. That was when I understood the real danger of the place. The market didn't need to force people to stay. It only needed to offer them something they wanted badly enough. Now I had a decision to make. I finally had the biggest story of my career. Imagine returning to Lagos and publishing this story, watching the world react. But right behind me, people were already becoming part of the place. Immediately, I removed the ledger page and let it fall. The moment it touched the ground, the trader stepped aside and the path opened. They allowed me to pass. I didn't wait. I turned and ran without looking back. That was when the third bell rang,
I almost made it.
and behind
Don't
me,
look back.
the market slowly disappeared into the darkness. By the time the first light of morning appeared, I reached the edge of the forest. I fell to my knees, breathing heavily. I escaped my life. When I returned to Lagos, the first thing I did was check everything I brought back from the market. The camera, the notebook, and the recordings. I checked to see if something had survived, but there was nothing. The greatest story of my career was gone before I could even tell it. For years, I had built my name by finding things people wanted to hide. But this time, I had found something that refused to be found. But at some point, it stopped bothering me. Because every time I remembered that night, I thought about something else. My father, the conversation we had, the forgiveness I received. That was real. I knew it was real. No missing photograph could change that. I had spent years punishing myself for something I couldn't change. But inside that market, I finally understood something. My father was never waiting for an apology. He was waiting for me to forgive myself. And maybe that was the true thing I had gone there to find. Peace. Even though it cost me 5 years of my life, when I think about what I received in return, I know I would make the same choice again. Because some things are worth more than time. Some moments are worth more than any story you could ever publish. Not every story is meant to be shared. Some truths are too dangerous to bring back into the world.